continue our series on St. Francis de Sales' Introduction to the Devout Life. We are in part 3, looking at the different virtues, and at the end of this chapter, he is giving advice to people in different states of life. We just looked at those in the married vocation, and now we're going to look at the advice for those who have been previously married, but whose spouse has now died, specifically that of widows. He's going to quote St. Paul's letter to Timothy, saying that they honor the widows who are truly widows. And so then he goes on to explain what this means. What does he mean by truly widows? So he says, first, what makes someone a true widow is the decision to persevere in the state of chaste widowhood and renouncing any kind of subsequent marriage. I want to note right away that it doesn't mean that someone can't get married again, but a kind of widowhood that he's going to speak of is one where one is married and then chooses freely not to marry again. He says the true widow could desire to offer her body and her chastity to God by vow in order to strengthen herself in her widowhood. So it could even be the case in which she actually makes a vow then afterwards. There have been cases in which we've had married women saints who have decided to join a religious life afterwards. And so that's a kind of widowhood, true widowhood that they take on. Of course, it doesn't require them to do that. They could take a kind of vow and still live in the secular world as well. He says a vow renders the works done as a consequence of it more pleasing to God. It strengthens the courage for them to do them. So even though making a vow for a widow who is not going to get married again isn't necessarily required, it will assist them in living out this time of no longer being married. If a widow is contemplating taking that vow, he says, let them first examine well their courage, invoke heavenly inspiration, and take counsel from a wise and devout director. So they want to be able to take the advice of a spiritual director first before they make such a commitment. Secondly, he says that this renunciation of any kind of second marriage must be done purely and simply with greater purity. So it shouldn't be done for any kind of worldly reason. So he says it shouldn't be done to leave the children rich so that you don't marry and then the money is consumed by the family as you continue with the next spouse, or their kind of worldly intention. The third thing that a true widow does is to separate herself from secular satisfactions. It could be the case in which now that someone is not married anymore, he says they could be pleased with being courted or caressed or flattered, to wish to be invited to balls and dances and other celebrations, to be perfumed and dressed splendidly so that others will notice them. But he says that that's not the mark of a true widow. That would be to be alive in the body and dead in the spirit. He says really they need to prune away the worldly superfluities as necessary for anyone to desire to live devoutly, is especially necessary for the true widow. The devout widow does not seek to be called or esteemed as beautiful or lovely, but she is satisfied with being what God wants that she be, that is, humble and lowly in His sight. Fourth, it says that when it has to do with loving one's husband, to love the husband while he is still alive is quite common among women, but to love him so much after his death that she wants no one else is a decree of love which belongs only to true widows. It is not very rare to hope in God while the husband helps and is her support, but to hope in God when she is deprived of this help is worthy of great praise. Hence the perfection of virtues practiced in marriage is more easily recognized in widowhood. So St. Francis is saying that, it's easy or common for spouses to love one another while they're married, but to love the spouse so much that even after one dies, to love them so much that you don't desire to replace them with another relationship. Certainly it's allowed because you're no longer married, but he says this is really a true mark of widowhood. And so he shows that, the virtues that were developed within the marriage can more easily then shine forth outside of marriage, because now that widow is even more dependent upon God for everything. Fifth thing that he notes is the widow with children who need their guidance and management, especially in spiritual matters and in the physical needs of their life, cannot and should not abandon them in any way whatever. So, for example, if a woman's a widow and she wants to consecrate her life to the Lord afterwards and maybe even go to a convent, she can't abandon her children to do that. But he says if the children do not stand in need of her guidance, then she ought to gather all her affections and thoughts and direct them to God and her progress in holiness. Next he says, let prayer be the constant practice of the widow. Since she now has only love for God, she ought to speak almost only of God. Her other love, the spouse, is gone, and so in seeking to be with her spouse again in eternity, she should seek God the rest of her earthly life. Number 7, the practice of virtues suitable to the holy widow are perfect modesty, renunciation of honors, or ranks of social gatherings, of titles, and similar vanities. Other virtues include serving the poor and the sick, comforting those who suffer, instructing girls in the devout life, and giving a perfect example of all the virtues to young women. Neatness and simplicity are the 2 ornaments of their garments, humility and charity the 2 ornaments of their conversation, modesty and chastity the ornament of their eyes, and Jesus Christ crucified the unique love of their heart. Such a beautiful reflection that he gives that, the woman still, or man in the case where your spouse has passed away, you still have a very important role in the church. It's a very important vocation. He concludes that the true widow must never blame or criticize those who marry a second or third or even a 4th time. For in some cases, God arranges thus for greater glory. So, it's perfectly allowed for someone to be married again, and so ones that choose true widowhood should not look down on those who choose to marry again. It is always necessary to keep in mind this teaching of the ancients, that neither widowhood nor virginity has any rank in heaven, except that which is given to them by humility. Whatever it is that our vocation is that God calls us to at that point in our life, we must accept with humility and not pride, thinking that we are the ones doing it, but know that it is His love that upholds us. God bless.